Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Let's do this. Are you awake? Did I scream too much? Happy Friday. I hope you did have a peaceful week. And of course, tonight we are diving into one specific topic. And this specific topic is the document that did premiere. Well, premiere was published last night around 2 a.m. Certainly meant more for Europe to cause some debacle there, which it successfully did accomplish. And of course, I'm talking about the national security strategy that was published by the White House again overnight. It looks like this. Perhaps you already read it. It's not too long. It's not full Project 2025, not 790 whatever pages. This is just about 30 plus 2 pages, sort of like an introduction by President Trump. But within those 30 pages, you do see the trajectory, which is just confirmed by the White House, what we predicted earlier. They call, first and foremost, they refer to President Trump as the big peacemaker. So we're going to see what those alleged 8 wars were that he, again, allegedly settled. So we're going to dive into that. So you have full review and data, to make up, again, your mind. And that's what I'm here for. And of course, it does represent also the views of this administration and United States herewith as to security of Europe and Ukraine specifically, but then also the stance towards China in Indo-Pacific altogether. So I also managed to get commentary from Asia Society. This is Park Avenue, a big think tank with current and former lawmakers and folks from a variety of foreign affairs ministries of US and elsewhere. So they are dissecting what specifically the part that deals with Asia, what it means, what will be the consequences, and where are we going from there. Okay, so again, thank you so much for joining. I know it's Friday. I know you don't care about politics at 7:26 p.m. But if you can't watch it now, maybe you can watch it later. My point is to make it useful. Hi, Tidy White. Hi, Timmy. Hello. Time for factual information. Amen. Hi, Mike. Hello. Yes. Hello, everybody. Yes. Thank you so much again for being here. Okay. So let's unpack this single most important document, why it is important. Because to put it point blank out there is that this is not a conspiracy. This is not something that we are guesstimating that, Trump administration thinks about, or United States, or Department of State, Department of Defense / war, or whatever. This is official game plan. So to compare it with Project 2025, because I saw many people were drawing parallels, Project 2025, first of all, was by Heritage Foundation. It was before, hi Irene, hello. It was before the presidency itself. Yes, President Trump at that point, President-elect Trump kind of distanced himself from Project 2025, but it did describe the first 180 days of the presidency. We're past that. So we're nearing a year of the presidency. So we were wondering, where are we going from there? Yes, it deals with foreign policy. It does not really talk much about anything national, right? And anything US related. But to put it, again, in simple terms, how much more can you change? Because a lot of agencies are even dismantled. If you think about USAID or USAID, however you refer to it, or even NSA, it was 2,000 people being fired just this month. Again, national security is now a task of Secretary of State Rubio. He's also dealing with USAID, but he's not, and somehow, right? We're also dealing with the Department of Education, and the only task that the current secretary is, tasked with is closing it down and dismantling it. So unless, what can we change more, right? We are on the trajectory to lose more jobs, which we lost about 38 million jobs this month, speaking of November. And mostly this was a burden shared by the small businesses rather than large corporations. Now, that's where we're going from there. Why foreign policy matters? Because yes, this will affect everyone. because the big topic of that document is, again, weaponizing tariffs. And if you do weaponize tariffs against certain countries, essentially you are taxing importers who are in the US selling products imported from elsewhere. So it is very much connected to the consequences that we within United States will be facing. But again, it speaks about foreign policy and not internally. Okay, now if you do have questions, please put them out there. Hi, Lynn. Hello. Again, I'll dive through, but I'll answer your questions as we go from there. So, on paper, first and foremost, it casts Trump as president of peace. Today, you saw him receiving some FIFA Peace Award. He put the medal on himself. He danced YMCA, all that. Fine. Now, how realistic is that? Now, in reality, it reveals something much deeper, which essentially is a quiet pivot away from Europe and the Indo-Pacific and back toward America's own hemisphere. And this is a very particular moment that we did not understand about a month ago. We didn't understand. I mean, you could foresee it, but the official statement by this White House was that we're focusing on the Indo-Pacific. Hereforth, we will be withdrawing our troops, and they began withdrawing around 800 US troops from Romania at this point. We are withdrawing from Europe to be focusing on the Indo-Pacific. Now, with this plan, they're talking about Western Hemisphere. It talks about put America first, make all the relationships transactional. We saw it already in practice, so this is not new. But officially to state that we don't really give much thought about Europe, to put it nicely, and now also in the Pacific, that changes a little bit. So it also reframes China as more economic rival than existential enemy, and a very uncomfortable signal for Ukraine. Now, why does it matter? Yes, you do have right now President Macron in Beijing. He's visiting China. He has screaming teenagers and children, and he hugs everybody, and he cries, and he does all those gestures. He is there, of course, to talk about the relations between France and China, but also to see how flexible is President Xi towards, his relation, or how dedicated he is to his relationship with Putin. China is a very big supporter that Russia relies upon when it comes to this murderous invasion of Ukraine. So is he flexible? Is he not? Turns out to be not really. That's at least what we're seeing. Of course, we all hope for a change. We all hope for something different. But at this point, China is very much profiting off of Russia. Of course, it buys cheap gas at price value. Of course, it has pretense to outer Manchuria and some other territories. Of course, it also dives into Venezuela, right, where you have Maduro, who relied on Wagner mercenaries in 2009 to remain in power. A big help, right, that he received from Putin. And so for that, he transferred part, and now actually all of gold reserves to St. Petersburg, where they held. And Venezuela is being also a very big topic for China. They're investing in it. They are interested in national resources. Everybody's very much, scrambling around to satisfy this AI development, right? Which does require a very big amount of minerals and resources altogether when it comes to electricity as well. Now, so China is interested in Venezuela. Russia is it has an agreement with Maduro himself for the next 10 years to have this, as they call it, unconditional relationship. Now, for Russia, they put it out there. What does it mean? We'll see as we go. But they also have such agreement with China as well. We saw Chinese paid troops in Ukraine. Ukraine did document it pretty well. UN documented as well. Now, as for now, we know those are paid troops. Those are not sent officially by Beijing, but they are there. As we know, in China, nothing happens outside of Xi Jinping's approval. So yes, they're there. They're also testing their equipment. They're testing their drones. They're testing their battle testing, everything that helps them to make their force more efficient. Again, Russia relies upon it. Russia also has such agreement with North Korea. We also saw North Korean forces there. Then it was confirmed by actually Kim Jong-un's office that those are officially sent troops to Russia and whatnot and what for. So he does have agreements with certain countries. So it's not really Putin by himself, right? Because I just want to combat this whole notion where anything that we hear about Russia willing to expand the conflict, we're seeing the sort of the contrary or the counter arguments as to they're running out of money, they're breaking down, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, but they also do have supporters. And China does a good job controlling Russia, not helping them too much that they will be too emboldened, but do just enough so they keep fighting. Okay, and promising hereforth. Now, let's walk through this whole thing. So what the document is and why we care, right? So first, this is official national security strategy of United States of America as of November 2025, not a campaign speech, not a think tank paper / Heritage Foundation. This is what US government is telling itself and its allies it wants to do, and it began to do, right? It defines what US wants in the world, what tools it claims to have, how it plans to match ends and means, and tone of this whole thing is very different from any NSS papers drafted by Obama, by the Biden administration, and also, quite frankly, by Bush administration as well, if we were to go back. It also differs from Trump's first NSS documents. Now, the tone is very different. It's America First 2.0 manifesto. So if you do read it, it rather resembles a manifesto than some type of an NSS plan that just puts sort of the priorities out there, because it has a very colorful language. I'm not going to read it out to you here, but I do have some quotes. Now, it attacks globalism. And this is something that Trump administration has been focusing on. As you remember, during ANGA, I attended this, turned out to be MAGA, MAGA, sort of closed out Atlantic Council dinner where President Macron was honored and Besant was there, and the head of BlackRock, Larry Fink, was there, and also Infantino and what's his face, the Argentina's president. Now, why do I mention that? President Macron focused his acceptance speech on globalism and the importance of it, and that being the core of American dream / American success. Because you're building companies to sell elsewhere, not just within the United States, right? You do have cheap labor elsewhere, was also something that US built up as a system for decades. Then you do sell again, you produce it cheap, you add your markup, you sell, right? And his whole point was we have to focus on remaining open, on the borders remaining open for transactions, for trade, for travel. US is also making a gazillion dollars, right? I'm emphasizing the gazillion on travel, or has been making on travel. Right? If you think about the budget of New York City, the budget of any other, big city or a very attractive for tourism location, you will have to account for tourism for, holding up the budget. So his point was, it's really a wrong idea to go with America first. It will be America alone, right? Because if you start making it all transactional, people, and countries will sit down and say, okay, well, pragmatically speaking, because you started this game, now I'm playing by your rules. Cool. All right, so now I will see what's actually in my interest, and perhaps US is not in their interest at some point, right? So now, it treats culture, immigration, and traditional families as security issues. And traditional families are the wife, the husband, they have kids. Wife has no say. She's, kitchen cleaning, kids, whatnot, don't pursue the career. They write it in this goddamn document. So they're building the traditional values very much connected to Christianity. Now, United States we call it a melting pot. Canada refers to itself as a mosaic. But everybody, it's envisioned in our constitution here to have right of religion, freedom of religion, to exercise any type of religion or none, right? So really connecting Christianity to traditional values. It just speaks a bit of racism and then profiling, right? Now, it elevates industrial policy, tariffs, and energy dominance to the level of national security doctrine. Now, this is a very cute try because now, as Supreme Court is deciding, right, we expect this decision to come by the beginning of 2026 on the weaponization of tariffs by Trump himself as president. With this Supreme Court, I mean, today they decided to somehow review this birthright to citizenship, which Trump suggested, although in the Constitution it exactly says that you're entitled to have your citizenship if you're born here. But they want to connect it to DACA. They want to connect it to, any type of, parents, whether they came here legally or illegally or whatever. All that, if passed, will cause another wave of deportations of kids who were born literally today. Where you go from there? So again, this is what will affect the national politics going forward. And then, of course, if we were to dive into some martial law, whatever, yes. But to focus on industrial policy, tariffs, and energy dominance. So the tariffs are kind of dependent, a lot, dependent on this Supreme Court ruling, which will come in January. Do I expect Supreme Court to decide in favor of Trump? Yes. Do you not? Okay, I would love to be surprised, and I'll be first to say, hey, my intuition was hella wrong. So now, let's read one short quote from this frame. Quote, first and foremost, we want the continued survival and safety of the United States as an independent, sovereign republic. We want a resilient national infrastructure. We want the world's most robust industrial base. We want the restoration and reinvigoration of American spiritual and cultural health. Explanation. This is not just about tanks and missiles, obviously. It's about a whole ideological vision. I'm not sure if you read Mein Kampf. I grew up in Germany. As a Ukrainian born, this was interesting. I was in, school where we were taught to feel guilty for everything that Germany did. For me, it was a little identical issue there. But altogether, it very much resembles those times. End of 30s. Right? And I'm talking about 1930s. Now, it's about whole ideological vision of what America should look like internally and how it should act externally. And again, we're speaking about foreign policy, but very much connected to inside, right? What happens nationally. Again, president of peace. It's PR versus reality. So let's dive in. This is up, let's set it up clearly. NSS calls Trump the president of peace and claims he has settled unprecedented peace and aid conflict in just 8 months. Good slogan. If you ever worked for any election campaign, I did not, but they always go with slogans. 8 wars in 8 months. Very easy to remember, very clickbaity. Okay, so those conflicts, according to them, include Gaza, Israel, Iran, Armenia, Azerbaijan, or as Trump refers to it, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Thailand, DRC, right, Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, India, Pakistan, plus Egypt, Ethiopia, and Serbia, Kosovo. Some of these are real diplomatic wins, and we have to point them out, right? Another story, did Trump family monetize it or not? A story for another day. Did America play a role? Did they settle? If yes, congratulations, great achievement. Now, some are ceasefires, and some are frameworks of peace. Non-committal, kind of, I'm going to put what I envision, you're going to put what you envision, put something together. Yeah. So, ceasefire framework and fully implemented peace agreements. Those are very 3 different stories. So let's dive in. Gaza. Yes, there is a U.S. brokered ceasefire. Yes, all known living Israeli hostages were released. Great and great. But Gaza is devastated, governance unresolved, and the political settlement is incomplete. Calling the war as ended is generous at best. Clickbaity, at least. So we still get reports on a daily basis that there are clashes, that our people are, they claim to be misunderstanding each other's action, whatever. But is Trump Gaza proceeding there? Or are we actually going through some 20 steps? What are those 20 steps? And what type of step are we here? Are we in lockstep or cha-cha step or whatever? So ceasefire. Okay, hostages returned, ceasefire, but it's not ended anything. Now, Israel, Iran, US strikes plus diplomacy produced a ceasefire after the June war. That is real, right? Okay, there were 12 days of war. Then the US did affect in one way or another the Iranian nuclear capabilities. It delayed it actually by months, not by years, as US claimed. Now, this is again according to independent think tanks and sources. So it did affect it, yeah, but Iran's nuclear program is damaged, not erased, and the rivalry is alive and well. Okay, now Armenia, Azerbaijan, DRC, Rwanda, Cambodia, Thailand, India, Pakistan, those are agreements and de-escalation. De-escalation, that means we're pausing our hot phase and we're sitting down to discuss. Timmy is taking notes per usual. Thank you. Oh, thank you. So you'll have questions for me for off the record. By the way, if you're part of Onest Plus, there's some button here somewhere, wherever you're watching on YouTube. We're meeting every last Friday of the month where you can ask me questions. We're meeting on Google Meet, so you can see me, ask questions. It's off the record. So, okay. Now, de-escalation agreements, but implementation is shaky, tensions remain, some deals are stalled. Okay, let's move on. So yes, there's a story that Trump is a crisis manager, especially around hostage deals and short, intense wars, but the 8 wars ended slogan in the NSS is classic PR. It turns fragile ceasefires and partial frameworks into finished peace. This sets up the core theme for the rest of this document. The document is not just describing reality, it's trying to brand Trump's foreign policy. So this is a bit of, that's why I call it a manifesto, right? Manifesto is a lot of ideology. It's less practicality and more visual optics, right? Or the way you want to be perceived. So let's talk about Ukraine, Europe, right? And a quiet pivot back to stability with Russia. So, quote, it's a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine in order to stabilize European economies, prevent unintended escalation or expansion of the war, and reestablish strategic stability with Russia, as well as to enable the post-hostilities reconstruction of Ukraine to enable its survival as a viable state. Okay, first, let's pay attention to some words here, because it's a lot of woo. Now, the verb negotiate, not win. When it refers to, and it's throughout the document when it talks about Ukraine, that Ukraine will need to negotiate peace, not Russia would need to withdraw or Russia would need to concede or, right? Then the strategy never talks about actually helping Ukraine defeat Russia or liberate all occupied territories, or at least attempt to. The goal is negotiated rapid end to the fighting. And here I want to take a little pause. So we're referring to Ukraine war a lot of times. At this point, we can, legally speaking, because we are now at that stage where it can be considered a war. Why? Imagine you do have a neighbor. You have a garden, you have a house, you have a garden, you have a neighbor. And you do have your fence, right, is your border. And so your neighbor has planted a tree right next to the fence, and the tree is overlapping to your side. So now you have to be cleaning this, like there's leaves, there's maybe some fruit falling and it's like stingy and you have to clean it. So it starts bothering you. So you start saying, well, why are you invading my place? Maybe they build a new fence and now that moved a couple of inches into your territory. Or maybe you were that hero who moved this. And so now you have started having border issues. Now, expand it into big mashup, and then now you're talking about countries, right? Countries have questions about the borders. Now, this is a war because I will come to your territory to fight for my space, which I believe is mine. You will come into my territory. We're fighting. We go crossing the borders, and we're fighting here, we're fighting there. This is sort of a legal understanding of a war. What Ukraine was dealing with since 2014 is invasion. Invasion is part of aggression. That's why we talk about aggression against Ukraine. Now, at some point, when Ukraine did this incursion into Kursk area, which is Russian territories, and Belgorod, right? Not just shooting considered defense, right? When you target their capacity and you target their military objects with intention to prevent them from shooting at you. So you want to disable their launching capabilities, right? This is part of defense. But when Ukraine crossed the border, went into Kursk, started getting territory there, preparing for this land swap, so to speak, which at this point is not even considered. At that point, it became a war. So now we can call it a war. I always had a bit of an issue when people from the beginning said war. War means they're both aggressive. Here, Ukraine wasn't getting into anybody's business. Now, whose interests are prioritized? Back to this document. The listed reasons are stabilize European economies, prevent escalation, reestablish strategic stability with Russia. So Ukraine enters only at the end of that document. At the bar is modest, right? So, and the bar is modest. It's survival as viable state, not full sovereignty, not justice, not borders, not according to UN Charter, Vienna Convention, Budapest Memorandum. By the way, Budapest Memorandum turned 31 years old today. Rest in peace, in pieces. So, no, we don't see that language. We're just saying there will be a deal. It better be rapid because we want to stabilize our economic relations with Russia. Now, Ukraine enters by the end. The war is framed as European problem. The document criticizes European governments for unrealistic expectations about war. What does it mean? European governments referring to UN Charter. European governments talking about using those frozen Russian assets, or at least profits off of Russian assets. This is all seen as destabilization, unrealistic expectations. Shut up and dribble, right? If you're a LeBron fan, you know what I mean. It says many of them sit in fragile coalitions, referring to Europe again. They trample democratic principles and ignore a public that wants peace. Excuse me. Which public wants peace? I think we all can agree that we want peace. Unless you're a little cuckoo crazy. Why would you, prefer to have war or whatever, right? Yeah, if you interview Russians, it's a different story. But at this point, we are talking about peace that is long lasting. And for that to be long lasting, it has to be just. Just comes, refers not to just, it happens just. No, it happens justly. Justice. So it happens according to some legal document. UN Charter is the first thing to consider. It doesn't mention that. It actually targets Europe for being extra special for considering all that and preventing a very fast, rapid, some type of agreement and, aggression, right? Aggression within the negotiation. So, in other words, the NSS paints prolonged support for Ukraine as a kind of elite project in Europe that is out of step with voters. And if you think about Europe, and if you think about those voters, and if you think about who would think about it, that's the right wing in Romania, right wing in whatever. And, we constantly try to see a right wing, whatever, as aggressive. You have to really go into every country and see what is right, what is left there. Because in some countries, right wing is very pro-Ukraine, pro-peace, pro-just peace and sovereignty and all that. Meanwhile, the left is different. So don't think American way when you hear right or left. But when we think about, let's say, Orban, right? Orban, the big friend of Putin, he's in Hungary. Today, he finally blocked any aid for Ukraine. He's throwing a tantrum in European Union. European Union can perfectly use they have a very, very good chapter 7. Here's a bankruptcy, but there you can actually limit their veto power, limit their, pause the, whatever the accounts receivable for Hungary or whatever. We can dive into that topic for another day. But Hungary is a problem. Slovakia is a problem. Yes, so there, this population is pro-peace, but at the expense of Ukraine. Today in Germany, they also signed a law, was approved by Bundestag, that they will be recruiting men 18 years old and older for training. And if there will be need, God forbid, to recruit them, then they will have to step forward. So for now, they have to undergo medical examination and start, just at least put their name up there. And we saw youth protesting right in front of, in Berlin, in the middle of the city, kind of, complaining that they don't want to be a part of it. It doesn't mean they're right or left. It's just when you grew up for decades in something where you heard about World War II, your grandparents or maybe great-grandparents talked about it, but you never really experienced anything but complacency. And so, yeah, it will take a while to understand the threat. Now, Russia is also recast as stability partner. The text emphasizes reestablishing conditions of strategic stability with Russia. Strategic stability in Cold War language. Now, that is important here to point out. It's about managing a relationship with a major power, especially nuclear risk, not about punishing aggression. So when the White House puts strategic stability, doesn't mean I'll push Russia to behave the way it has to behave as a reliable partner so we can have stability. In this case, we want to kind of get rid of any inconveniences to create the stability so we can start trading, so we can start making money. Now, on a side note, Putin did promise Trump to, be a part of those $300 billion in frozen assets. Some already float the idea of U.S. partially, or Trump family or whatever, co-owning or owning Nord Stream. So this will, of course, free Russia from any, sanctions, because if the ownership changes or investment or whatever, percentages do matter in that case. So they have already discussed, taking parts of this bear, right? The bear that is not even shot yet. They don't even know where the bear is, how to hunt for a bear, but they already divided the parts and particles, who gets what, right? And then kind of interesting here. So conclusion, when you put this together, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that Washington's priority is shifting. The goal is not a decisive Ukrainian victory, but a fast negotiated ceasefire that first calms European markets, lowers the risk of escalation, and restores a workable balance with Moscow. Now, why does it matter for China here? Calming European markets. Because they shifted. They were facing tariffs. Now tariffs are frozen for a year, but not all. So they're shifting, and they're trying to get into European markets, which they did, which caused Ursula von der Leyen to travel to Beijing and start talking to Xi Jinping, not to overflow European markets. Same goes for India as well. Now, lowers the risk of escalation, also very profitable for China too, because it needs European markets. Restores workable balance with Moscow. Now, that is really good for Trump. Ukraine's own aims, regaining all its territory, accountability, long-term security guarantees are not presented as U.S. objectives here. So, let's stop right here. Today, it started yesterday, another round of negotiations between Umerov, right, head of National Security Council of Ukraine, and other partners in Miami, with envoy Vitkov and unelected, unofficial Kushner. This continued for the second day in a row. It will continue tomorrow. Umerov put a long statement, practically saying nothing, just continue talking, and it's like, blah, blah, blah. So all that continues, and Umerov actually pointed out that they're not talking about any territories there. They're talking about the future and what will be the reconstruction of Ukraine. But I mean, it doesn't matter where Ukraine ends and begins for that type of reconstruction. So they can't move forward before Ukraine agrees to get rid of those territories. And get rid of those territories means, let's point the picture, allow Russia at this point not to steal children, but fully Russify them. They're reportedly now sending them to North Korea. They're sending them to Belarus and keep them in camps in Russia. There are about 168 camps in those three locations where they Russify, Nazify those children, Ukrainian children. Official number is 20 million, but Russia already allocated, for a fact, $7 billion for 2026 for those youth nationalistic projects, completely targeting kids in occupied territories. So that is what they're planning. I mean, this is part of their budget. This is the money allocated. Because a lot of you talk about, oh, Russia is broke, Russia's joke, blah, blah. 7 billion allocated in the budget, sent to North Korea. They're shown videos how to fight against US folks. Okay, so it's all part of a very big project. There in that budget, they guesstimate 1 million of those kids to be Russified and used as fighters. Also, others will be used as fighters in those occupied territories. And those who don't, serve any type of purpose will be tortured, will be murdered. We saw it. This is not hypothetical. Think about Bucha. Think about Mariupol. Think about all this where Russia showed its actual face and actuality. So giving up those territories means putting those people to slander. Like just allowing on your watch for all of this to happen, and then for those people to be used against you. Also, Russia is very known for drawing big numbers. They drew this big $2 trillion budget for Trump to do business with. Is it real? Well, what are those $2 trillion? Who sponsored it? Russia can't. So what kind of business are you going to do? Russia is very good to offer you an okie doke. You agree to it, and then somehow you sidelined. They need to return frozen assets. They need to get rid of sanctions. By the way, yesterday, White House already dropped sanctions on Lukoil. It was petrol stations outside Russia, and they dropped sanctioning them until, I think, April 2026. So, it's sort of the motion. The problem here is Ukraine, and Ukraine backed up by Europe. And yesterday we saw this leaked document where the call, essentially, between European leaders with Zelensky, where Stubb said, we can't leave Zelensky with those guys, referring to Witkoff and Kushner. We have to protect him. So Europe is in the way. And now it's officially written in this NSS document. So, because the US controls much of Ukraine's military and financial lifeline, this framing almost inevitably means pressure on Kiev and on European capitals to accept settlement sooner rather than later. Now let's translate it into human. Yes, we have the Pearl Initiative, which essentially is one account that gets all the billions of dollars. Some donate millions, some billions, they invest in it. And this Pearl means purchasing for Ukraine arms and everything Ukraine needs from United States. United States that sells you anything with a third country objective, you have to get a green light from DC so you can use it against third country, even if it's defense. They can also control the system itself. Remember when Biden sold long-range weapons to Ukraine, but then they received it and realized it's blocked at a certain range, so it wouldn't be reaching Moscow as official pretense. So you buying this thing with a lot of options, with a lot of problems, right? It's like you see the red flags already, it's like dating. You see a bit of red flags. You're like, oh, maybe it's a bouquet. No, it's red flags, not goddamn roses. So you see some countries, Italy being one, others, they essentially approved the 12th package direct aid to Ukraine. I think Norway is already on that end. I'm not connecting it against US or Pearl, no. But I'm saying countries are investing in Ukraine straightforward. They're deciding on the Pearl Initiative. Meanwhile, NATO labels Pearl Initiative as Ukraine aid. But the only country that gets this money, or the money for this aid, is US. And if US enshrines it into national security agreement, that Ukraine's fight is not a priority, we want fast agreement so we can deal with Russia, will those weapons be produced? Will those weapons arrive in Ukraine? Because it goes against US priority that is official document published by the White House. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not what you think or what I think. Let's freaking read. Black on white. So, now they also put out the Trump corollary. Corollary, if you had to Google, fancy for proposition. It's a Trump proposition. And the Western Hemisphere first world. So now, just geographic shift here. The NSS says the US will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine and adds a Trump corollary. Trump proposition. Yeah. Now we have to deal with what is Monroe Doctrine. So maybe you're European, maybe you didn't care much what the hell that is. So Monroe Doctrine, announced by President James Monroe in 1829, declared America's off limits to future European colonization and interference, asserting U.S. hegemony in the Western Hemisphere while promising U.S. non-interference in European affairs. It was a bold statement of U.S. foreign policy, initially weak, but later used to justify U.S. expansion and intervention in Latin America, becoming a cornerstone of American hemispheric policy. Key principle: non-colonization. The Western Hemisphere was no longer open to colonization by European powers. I mean, we had the war for that. Non-intervention. The U.S. would view any European interference in independent American nations as a threat to its peace and safety. And reciprocity. The U.S. pledged not to meddle in European wars or internal politics, which served in 1829, now apparently serves to dismantle 80 years of work, where after the war, to put it in simple terms, U.S. said, okay, Europe, you keep fighting with each other. Let me come in, put up some bases and stabilize you. So I'll be that guarantor. I'll be that peacemaker here. That's why U.S. is called police state in good terms, also in bad terms. Talk about Iraq, Iran, whatever. Now, this is all being dismantled because of 1823 law. Okay, today is, I told you, 31 years since US, UK, Russia guaranteed peace for Ukraine and sovereignty for Ukraine. It's not a framework. It's not a hoopla ha, hoopla hoo. It's a signed agreement for which, in return, Ukraine dismantled a second biggest nuclear arsenal in Europe. For what? We have videos. I can show you videos from the 90s, where upon this agreement, Ukraine was destroying the planes, and people were literally crying. The engineers were crying. A lot of those were produced in Kharkiv, where I'm from. So it was a somber moment, but it was a moment of hope. We will be part of Europe. We'll be part of the good guys. They will protect us. And now 31 years later, exactly on that day, we're using something in 1823, when US did not even have capabilities to secure peace in Europe. I mean, it's 1823. So, where US big problem was to stop colonization from Europe in the US. We want to be sovereign. We fought for it. We don't want the Brits. We don't want the French. We don't want anybody here. We don't want Spanish. We want us. We want to own what we have. But now we're using this to own what you don't even have. Now, it doesn't just, now back to NSS, right? It doesn't just oppose foreign bases in the Americas. It opposes foreign ownership of key assets in the hemisphere: ports, infrastructure, telecommunication, critical minerals, and so on. Stop right here. Then I do have a big question about the Qatari base in Idaho. I did the deep dive. We're building literally Qatari base. They'll be trained by, of course, U.S. forces, use U.S. F-35s to fly, but it will belong to them. Will there be any follow-up of those, White House people who's supposed to be asking questions? You'll be called piggy anyway. Ask questions. Ask about Monroe Doctrine. Does Trump know what it is? Ask him. Ask about this no ownership of any U.S. assets. We're selling to Qatar, we're selling to Saudi Arabia, to UAE to build electricity, like to build big corporations, camps, anything in Texas, for instance, to serve our AI ambitions, electric grid, and whatever. We sell this officially. This is part of those frameworks that the White House points out as some type of contracts. They're never signed. They're always some type of a handshake framework deals, but touted as deals, but those are on our land and this is for sale. So it's contradicting whatever it says here. So will this be now prioritized? So no China, but please Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, just to clarify. Now, it calls for shifting US military focus back to Western Hemisphere, using the military against cartels if necessary. I mean, we already killed 87 people. Making trade and tariffs tools to pull Latin America closer to Washington and away from Beijing. What can be a killer in this constellation is the decision by Supreme Court. That's where I began. Disallowing president to use tariffs without approval by Congress against some type of nations, which will slow him down, prevent it. Not all Republicans are happy about the tariffs. At this point, they're already very much hearing from their constituents and their states they represent. They want to be reelected next year. So that will be a big doozy here. But if Supreme Court decides in his favor, then we're rolling. Now, just imagine, if Obama tried to pivot to Asia, this document is effectively a pivot back to Western Hemisphere, right? For Washington, the top strategic real estate is no longer primarily Europe or the Indo-Pacific. It's the Americas. It matters when we turn to Asia, right? So US pretty much says Latin America is mine. North America is mine. Latin America is also mine. Putin can do the Europe because I will not intervene. And Xi Jinping will do the Indo-Pacific. I will not intervene. And we all are like the three big tsars ruling over our constituents. Is that what it is, right? Now let's talk about Asia and China. This is where the commentary will come in from Asia Society. Now, who will be commenting? And I want just to put it out there, Senior President of Asia, the Asia Society, Wendy Cutler. Also, Farwa Ammer, Director of South Asia Initiatives. Emma Shanlett Avery, Director of Political Security Affairs at SBI. Lizzie Lee, Fellow of Chinese Economy, SBI Center of China Analysis. Lyle Morris, a Senior Fellow in Foreign Policy and National Security, SBI Center to China Analysis. Now, Wendy Cutler is a very known figure in trade, specifically with Asia. This is the boss. Now, let's talk about economic security allies and the short shrift for Asia, right? So starting with Wendy Cutler. She notes that the NSS embraces a now bipartisan idea. Economic security is national security. But she also points out a key difference in Trump's approach. The NSS focuses on reciprocity, fairness, and sovereignty rather than close coordination with allies. Translation, less we and our allies, right? More America first, others figure it out, name it, claim it, figure it out, right? Others adjust. Me, right? My way, highway, you got it. Now, the document wants to rebuild American industry, control critical minerals, and weaponize tariffs. But it largely frames these tools in terms of US leverage, not in terms of building shared frameworks, let's say with Japan, Korea, or the EU. It says, this will be my way, your will be some type of highway. Okay, let's stop right here. Let me read some questions. Mike says there's a buffoon in the room. He thinks he's 1980s. No, 1823. There's another person in the room that wishes it was 1980s. Then there is she. That's what I worry about, right? Mike says there is a Russian presence in Venezuela. They built stuff there for years. Why won't this administration admit that the access to all the resources there is reason for all the aggression? Yes and no. So when I spoke about Maduro getting help from Putin in 2009 through Wagner Group, then transferring for security reasons the gold reserves to St. Petersburg, this is the leverage that Putin has over Venezuela. Putin has to pay China for all the help he gets. Venezuela is part of that situation, right? Seemingly, the way it looks. China is a big player in Venezuela. I highly doubt US will be, marching over Venezuela. It shows that I want to be part of that conversation. At least this document here says we're focusing on Latin America. We want to own the Americas, so to speak, or at least rule upon them. So Timmy says, I think there is some lag every couple of minutes. Ah, really? I'm good here. Maybe you restart, because usually when I usually see it when it sucks. But please comment now. Okay, that's important. A document that is supposed to guide U.S. global policy, Asia beyond China, is almost an afterthought. And this really matters here, because if you think about President Biden, who, by the way, delivered a cute speech today, heartfelt, let's unite, and for youth to be understood. I put the clips in your newsletter that arrives tonight. Biden focused on building the IP4, right? Those are the Asian countries outside, of course, China, to defend Taiwan if needed, for them to have the capabilities when it comes to arms and assets, right? You hear several smaller countries buying F-35s and whatnot. But now for Trump, he still sells the arms, but he said, well, you use it the way you use it. And yes, you had Pete Hegseth traveling all across the Pacific very recently this summer or this fall, but he didn't really promise any close partnerships or any long-lasting partnerships. Now, with this document, we see that we care about China as a big player. We do care about Russia as a big player, and others figure it out. And others were actually those allies that both Biden and Obama focused on. Now, India and Quad, right? Those what I'm referring to, the IP4, and crisis management. So Farwa Ammer points, the NSS throws a lifeline to Quad, Japan, India, Australia, US, right? It shows Washington still sees India as central to Indo-Pacific stability, despite the lack of leaders summit this year. And you saw Putin being courted really by Modi, Prime Minister Modi in India for the past 2 days. So they also have signed this agreement, was ratified by Russian Duma a day before. Putin brought it to India, and they have signed this, as they call it, unconditional military collaboration. Putin today declares it should go beyond military, should be economic as well. Today also Putin launched the RT India, Russia Today, the propaganda channel India. Simonian, who is for 20 years head of this propaganda channel, she was also today appointed, enlisted as one of the most influential people of 2025 by Financial Times. So RT is also coming to US, so it's all a shit show. Anyway, Russia and India are tight. That's what I want to put out. Now, it shows Washington still sees India as central for Indo-Pacific stability despite the lack of leaders summit this year. The roadmap the NSS hints at for Quad critical minerals cooperation, right? This is really important. Again, we have big demands for it to satisfy the AI ambitions, not just in Asia, but even in the Western Hemisphere and Africa. So yes, US wants to deal with Africa. They wants to deal with Asia when it comes to minerals. That's why you also had even minerals deal with Ukraine, which is very difficult to even accomplish since partially the areas that Ukraine agreed to partner on are actually under occupation. So, and also you have to have an infrastructure to even get to those minerals and transport them, to be utilized. Now, the NSS treats India not only as a regional counterweight to China, but as a global partner in critical minerals and supply chains, including in Latin America and Africa. That's a big elevation of India's role, at least on paper. Now, Farwa also notes that India-Pakistan may May crisis is explicitly mentioned alongside other peace deals to send the message that crisis management, jumping in to put out fires, is now a core pillar of US strategy. So I will be making money here. And if you dare to have some type of crisis, I'm going to jump in and, fix it. Now, this is nothing new. Think about Iraq, think about Afghanistan. I mean, yes. So, translation: expect more short, sharp US mediation in South Asia when things flare. Now, Indo-Pacific contradictions. Emma Shanley Avery flags an important gap between paper and practice. On paper, the NSS says deterring conflict over Taiwan is priority. Allies should spend far more on defense. 5% of GDP becomes a kind of benchmark. The US wants targeted partnerships and for allies to take primary responsibility for their neighborhoods. Okay, but this is really serving President Trump's narrative, what he referred to US as a big convenience store, and people would be buying, it'll be all business. Remember, he mentioned it several times. So all those initiatives, right, when it comes to 5% GDP, and then NATO frames it has to be invested to purchase arms from US, all that, again, just benefits US. You will be dependent on us, but we are not promising anything in return, nor we feel any type of responsibility, or we are willing to put out any consequences for our inaction or wrongdoing or abandonment. Now, she points out contradictions. In Taiwan, deterrence is so central. Why does the White House hesitate to back strong signals from Tokyo, like Takaichi comments about Japan defending Taiwan? In reverse, actually, Trump had a conversation with Takaichi recently where he asked her to calm things down. If the Quad matters so much, why did Trump undercut a summit by stoking tensions with India? Right? Undercut summit, he didn't show up to APEC. To summarize, on paper, the Indo-Pacific looks like a top priority. In practice, there is a gap between military language in the NSS and the political behavior we actually see in the region. Now, crucially, to Asian allies, the Trump corollary proposal to the Monroe Doctrine sends a very clear message. America's core foreign policy interests are now in its own hemisphere. In Donald Trump's world, the US has quietly reversed the pivot. Now, China. It's a competitor, not existential enemy any longer. And this is the long game of China, right? Because in the first Trump 1.0 presidency, remember this whole China was the enemy. China has been this, China has been that. Now, please pay attention to Trump 2.0 presidency. From the first days, I have great relations with the Xi Jinping. I have this, I have that, I have this, I have that. I will be tariffing you. Which, okay, we're going to be fighting China, but then he uses that to cause a phone call or any type of negotiation, and then the tariffs are going back, hence the label taco, right? Trump always chickens out. And you're really abused to tacos because they're yummy. So we see that constantly, this reversal to those harsh policies towards China. And also, if you think about China's interest in Russia or Europe itself, this document here allows for all of those dreams to come true. Now, Lizzie C. Lee and Lai Morris write, Lizzie highlights the NSS repositions China less as an existential threat that wants to reshape the entire global order, more as a long-term economic and strategic competitor. The language is more pragmatic. The strategy even floats the idea of mutually advantageous economic relationship with China, while still condemning unfair practices, obviously. It explicitly says US policy is not grounded in traditional political ideology and drops the usual rules-based order framing. The same story as, remember, recently we heard this, for years at this point, we heard peace through strength about Ukraine, right? We will be supporting Ukraine till the very end. Peace through strength. Peace through strength, which really was a good sales point to all the Ukrainian community, specifically in Pennsylvania, that voted for Trump just for that reason. So, where is that now? Where is the strength? Where is the peace? All this now is sort of negotiations, very short term, profit related for the White House. Yesterday we saw, well, not yesterday. What is that company? It's called something machines, unusual machines, some type of that. And they kept getting contracts with Pentagon, because every day I get an email with contracts of the day. I'm so bored that I read it. I'm not bored, but I read it. Anyway, and this company altogether scored $680 million. Now we know that Donald Trump Jr. is on their board. Then there's another company that also has him on the board. They are now scoring also millions of dollars. So all of those Pearl capabilities, yada, 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 are benefiting actually one family. All right? So you guys keep praising me. All is amazing. All is an asset and beyond, I'm sure. But thank you, guys. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. My head will grow. I won't be able to wear a hat, but I appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, move on. That implies administration is leaving itself room to negotiate on trade and economic issues with Beijing while keeping a hard edge on technology and supply chains. Still, Xi Jinping has this law, right? Rule that he put into law that whenever any chips are sold that either use Chinese product or minerals or parts, right? Or utilize China's methods, right, of production, then he has to greenlight this sale, regardless if it was produced in South Korea or Taiwan. If it's sold to US, Xi Jinping has to greenlight it. Now think about this whole reversal about the cars, right? The big proclamation yesterday, woohoo, get out with your electric cars, drill baby drill, everything is gasoline. Trump claimed that electric cars are made of plastic and it's horrible and it's a Barbie car and all that. Now think about it, because electric cars, when all that is very dependent on Xi Jinping's yes or no, are not really profitable for you. But then drilling Alaska, and again, partnering with Russia, which we saw as a result of Anchorage, right, which Russia claims, I mean, there's no readout. Who knows what happened there? That is also benefiting Russia and China. So we're in the split of benefiting both. And again, you see it in the national executive order. Connect the dots, please. Now, Morris then adds the security side. On trade, there is space for a deal, talk of mutually advantageous relations. On defense, the tone is more hawkish. Quote, deterring a conflict over Taiwan, ideally by preserving military overmatch, is a priority. So you'll see U.S. putting, I mean, we have a bunch of assets, 20% of our Navy assets in, at least last time I checked, in Latin America. So are we going to drag them to Taiwan? Are we going to secure the strait? What's going to happen there? The South China Sea must remain open with no tolls or arbitrary closures by one country. But on the other hand, you say you want to preserve military overmatch. So where is it then? The U.S. will keep its long-standing Taiwan policy and oppose any unilateral change to the status quo. Okay. Compared to Biden's NSS, which framed China as the one power trying to reshape the entire international order, Trump's strategy turns down the ideological volume. It keeps the military edge, keeps the tech competition, but recasts China as hard-edged competitor rather than a civilized foe. That might actually lower the risk of all-out confrontation, which is a good thing, but only if the economic and military tracks don't end up colliding. Speaking of Taiwan. Now, big picture, what the NSS really tells us. Branding versus reality. The president of peace language is marketing. There are real ceasefires and deals, but many are fragile or incomplete. Ukraine and Europe, The war in Ukraine is being reframed as a problem to be managed and ended quickly, not a cause to be won at any cost. The priority is stabilizing Europe and restoring strategic stability with Russia. But then again, today US put a deadline on withdrawing troops from Europe, right, as part of NATO by 2027. So we give Putin a year. We are almost in 2026. Come on now, it's December 5th. So by 2027, that means in a year from now. So reverse pivot. The Trump corollary. I keep thinking coronary, and I'm like, anyway. Proposal, let's call it proposal, makes the Western Hemisphere the center of gravity. Asia beyond China gets the far less attention that you'd expect. China and Indo-Pacific. China is long-term competitor, not metaphysical enemy. The US wants to keep military overmatch around Taiwan while preserving space to bargain on trade and economics. Now, the Quad and India are important, but in practice, the US sends mixed messages. What to watch next? First, how fast Washington moves to pressure Ukraine and Europe toward a settlement. They have talks. On one hand, good, we do have talks. And I understand under Biden we didn't have talks. To move on, you got to have talks. We do have them. Now we have to see how that will progress. Ushakov today, the one that constantly looking behind his back when he's talking to press, I guess escaping windows or anything. He said that Witko's charm was wonderfully aided with Kushner's, what did he say? Systematic approach. Yes, systematic approach. He added system to it. Witkoff is charming and agreeable, and Kushner, and he said he envisions, again, Ushakov is Putin's aide, he envisions Kushner to play a major role in drafting the agreements. Unelected, unofficial. Okay. Now, next, what we need to watch out for, whether the US actually relocates military resources to Western Hemisphere. I mean, begin, sort of. And whether we see a serious US-China economic negotiation framed as mutually advantageous, even as the security rivalry deepens. With US, it could be advantageous and could be mutual, but if you're always drawing from Europe and also withdrawing from elsewhere, right, to the point where we take out our investment in the Amazon, right, not the company Amazon, but the river, and where Biden traveled to in the last month of his presidency or pre-last, and he pledged to donate $100 billion over years, and now this was all canceled out, but the project was ongoing. China stepped in and invested. Think about Latin America. China steps in and invests. Why did we have the issue with Panama Canal, right, to begin with? Where we leave, China gets in. My question is, if you're always drawing from Europe, who's going to own the bases? Are you going to give Putin the bases? Are you going to get it to the biggest bidder? Because that is where European security is really weak, for lack of a better word. It's dependent. Dependency is weakness in this, and Europe dependent for a bit too long, for about 80 years. So now, that's what I have for you. I mean, maybe not very sunny and shiny and whatever, but just wanted to kind of connect the dots here. Again, it is factually supported. You see it as my opinion. Please see it as you want to see. But I want you to kind of look way beyond phrases and clickbait, because this agreement has been used for many phrases, right? In the document, Trump says this. In the document, Trump said this. When you do have such manifesto, you have to, first of all, dig in and learn what is Monroe Doctrine. What has been our policy before? How does it differ, right? And geopolitically, if you zoom out, how does it look like? What are we doing and where, right? What are our priorities? So altogether, it seems very me, and others will adjust, and whom we respect is literally Putin and Xi Jinping as those powers, and certainly we do see it displayed in the behavior. What will happen from now? We'll see. We all hope for peace. We all hope for ending wars and aggression. I'm the first person truly to say I really want peace in Ukraine, but at what cost? Now, we can dive into that as well. This week was problematic going live. I had a couple of things to deal with. I will, of course, continue to come in. But I think from now on, when I hear from you, is a lot of you are coming here for analysis rather than for me rattling the news. So we'll focus every night more on what we did right now. We'll dive on Fridays for our community with questions and one topic, real deep dive. But every day I will try to connect the dots on what happened that day specifically. How is it related? Why does it matter for you? So that's what we will focus from now on, Monday through Thursday. And then Fridays, we have the deep dives. Last Friday of the month, we meet off the record. You can ask me questions, not recorded in any way. So it's completely anonymous. So if you want to join our Honest Plus community, please, there's a button on YouTube called Join. You would be supporting my work and the work of Honest Team, and this would be very appreciated. Now, I'm allowed to say all this because we don't run commercials or depend on any companies. So your support truly matters. Now, thank you so much, guys. Mike says you give us facts. Anyone can disagree, but if they do, they suck. Well, I'm going to go that far. You can disagree, please. Have a great weekend. Thanks for your hard work. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Timmy. I'm here for analysis 100%, connecting dots. Perfect. That's great approach. Perfect. 3 stars. Excellent. And thank you. Thank you, Irene. I appreciate you. Thanks, Mike. Thank you. And thank you, Irene and Timmy. And who else is there? Mike, for being Honest Plus members. I appreciate you. What else do we have? Best analyst. Oh, thank you. Well, by far not, but thank you. I'm aiming for it. Thanks. Oh, please join. Yes, thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Your newsletter is coming very shortly. Please stay warm. Freezing the hell out of us in New York. Dress up warm, stay warm, and I'll see you Monday. And if you have any questions, meanwhile, I'm mostly on Blue Sky. I'm rarely on X. I post just to keep something going there, but on Blue Sky, I'm a bit more talkative. So please connect there. Now, thank you again for being here. I appreciate you and have a good night. As always, keep your head on a swivel, right? And do what feels right. It's a very long marathon here. It's really, your survival depends on your well-being. Okay, take care of you. Have a good night.